Hail to the bus driver, bus driver, bus driver. Hail to the bus driver, man. He drinks and he cusses, he wrecks all the buses. Oh, hail to the bus driver, man. This week, I found myself finishing up a few jobs that I hadn't closed out on the prison bus. I've learned that the best way to move through a project is to sequence everything, then completely finish each step before moving on to the next one. Well, I haven't always done that, so it's time to play catch up. I'd wired the bus, as you might have seen in a previous video, but I still had a few 12-volt runs to install. And then an alternating current run for an air conditioning unit I finally decided on, and then grounding wires for both wiring systems. After talking with some of my helpful internet buddies about different grounding options, I opted to ground the systems to the internal frame of the bus instead of to the chassis down below. I did this to keep the ground connections clean and intact over time. I know the other way makes sense too, but since this is really a backup and secondary grounding setup, I went the way that I did. I gotta show you something in this box that's just super telling. A lot of the dudes on the bus ate like pickle relish and mayonnaise and stuff like that, and there are just a bunch of these old packs of relish and mayonnaise just down in here. I'll pull another one out. And not because people were stashing them in here, but because the mice were grabbing these guys on the bus. When I first got the bus, it had quite a few mice living on it. I think I've taken care of that problem, but there's still some old mustard packs and whatnot stuffed in here. Another unfinished job you saw at the beginning of this video involved pulling down another half of one of my old headbanger air conditioning units. Why pull things out from under the bus? I've started to need to make room for both a black tank for the toilet and a gray tank to drain the sinks and shower, so I need underbus room, lots of it. Another unfinished job. I previously pulled a dozen speakers out of the ceiling of the bus because I didn't like how they looked, and the ones that did work weren't very good speakers. But this left a dozen holes in the ceiling which have been sitting there for several months. It was time to cover these holes. After cutting a dozen 6-inch metal saucers, I sanded them smooth and screwed them in place. I thought a bit about how out of place they looked, all silvery against the white, but then convinced myself that they'll look much better when they're painted. I also riveted up some holes in the ceiling. My rivet gun worked for a while, then kind of worked, then got jammed, so I switched to a conventional hand riveter. I have a lot more to say about rivets and their virtues and limitations in comparison to screws, but I'll save that for a future video when I'm doing a lot more riveting. With loose ends tied up, it was time for something new: plumbing. I started by building a low cabinet to store my freshwater tank. This was made more solid by the wheel well underneath it. Then I got to work roughing in the area around the toilet and sink. Note that the bathroom proper, toilet and sink on one side and then shower on the other, exist across two sides of my back hallway. My plan at the moment is to fashion a door that swings out to close that area off, making a nice big kind of private bathroom. I'm about 90% sold on that plan. In framing up the toilet area, I became reacquainted with the fact that you kind of have to throw out much of what you know about building things to work on a prison bus. By this I mean that traditional carpentry is largely all about making things level. My bus itself isn't level and will likely never be fully level, so you can't really build things to level inside the bus. So I'm going with square. Square to the floor, square to the walls, and generally lined up with things like windows. And I screwed as much of this framing into the metal walls and ceiling as I could, which is proving to make for pretty solid connections. With the space of the toilet side of the bathroom partially defined with some walls, I was free to locate the toilet. Now, lovers of the old stainless steel prison bus toilet can shed a tear with me now when I say that I decided not to refurbish the old prison bus toilet. I know, it's sad. The deal is that it turned out that while beautiful looking and solid and full of stories, the old prison bus toilet is in fact air powered. This means that to give it a flush, water first moves your stuff down into an internal chamber, then a powerful blast of air from the bus's air compressor sends the poo off to the black tank. The air comes through this hose that I previously cut, not even knowing it was an air hose. Elegant as this water and air powered system is, my bus's air compressor doesn't hold pressure for more than a few days when the bus is parked and not running, and the thought of having to fire up the bus engine to pressurize the compressor's tank to flush the toilet didn't sound glamorous. But think of this, the toilet will no longer be flushed by the press of a button up by the driver's seat, so at least that's progress. I went with a lowboy plastic RV toilet from Amazon, which is almost like a toilet squatty potty combo. It cost me about $100, which is much less than new parts for the old stainless steel toilet, so I'm good with the decision. And then I had a problem. I had planned to sneak the black tank under the toilet and actually inside the rear outside gear compartment on the bus, but I finally realized that securing the weighty black tank while inside the storage compartment would be pretty darn near impossible. I'm going to take those guys out and relocate them over there. So this will be the location of the black tank up here, kind of close to the back wheel, but that way I can get my waistline coming out of the toilet directly. And once you cut one hole in the bus, why not cut another? So I cut a hole for my water inflow lines on the other side of the bus. The bus will have two types of water intake lines, pressurized and non-pressurized, just like it's got two kinds of tanks, black and gray, and two kinds of electric power, alternating and direct current. This bus is a landscape of duplicate and complementary systems. But it will just have a water flushing toilet, not an air plus water flushing toilet, so I guess you could say that I've simplified things. In my next video, finishing up the plumbing system and moving toward tricking out the inside. You'll see that next.